Army Men 3D was the third game in the Army Men series, following the Windows release of Army Men and Army Men 2, and it marked the series' debut on home consoles. Army Men 3D, taking advantage of the hype around 3D gaming worlds in the mid to late 90s, is essentially a slimmed-down remake of the original Army Men, but as a third-person shooter. As is par with the course for the Army Men series, it's not a breathtaking game that will make anyone's top 10 PS1 games list, but it's a fun enough little game, especially for fans of the series. Being a remake of the original game, Army Men 3D follows the same basic story as Army Men, albeit abridged. The short version is that the Green Nation has been invaded by the Tan Nation, and Green Intelligence reports that the Tan are assembling a mysterious superweapon that's being transported in 3 pieces. Playing as Sarge, you have to fight your way through the Tan forces to secure the 3 pieces of the key, so that not only can you keep the weapon out of Tan hands, as well as discover what it's supposed to do and seize it for the Green Army. This PlayStation remake cuts out probably a quarter of the game, which, given the move from PC to PS1, does make sense, but fortunately, what's cut out is largely filler missions that aren't central to the story. The shorter level list ends up working out well too, given the somewhat awkward controls that result in what I felt was a more difficult game than it needed to be, and a little bit tougher than the Windows game, arguably. Overall, I'd say they're roughly comparable in length, with Army Men 3D coming in maybe a little bit shorter, largely because of the awkward and clunky controls. Visually, the game is about as okay as it gets for PlayStation games. It certainly doesn't look bad for the era or for the hardware, but it doesn't look especially good either. It's largely a fairly drab brown throughout. This is especially true with the cutscenes. It doesn't preserve all of the cutscenes from the PC original, but it does have the iconic opening and closing cutscenes. The problem is that these scenes are extraordinarily low resolution and noticeably choppy. To some extent, that's an unfortunate reality of video on CDs in the mid-1990s, but it's a shame that the presentation took such a hit because of it. It's admirable that 3DO tried to include the 2 most dramatic scenes, but given the hit the presentation took, I almost think it would have been better to try to remake the scenes in a style the PS1 could more comfortably handle, with pre-rendered images. The audio is probably the part of the game with which I have the most issues, and that was the case in the PC original as well. The voice dialogue is extremely minimal, which truthfully is more a blessing than anything else, given the quality of the cutscenes and the soundtrack. The music is truly god-awful. It's not even that the music itself is what's bad, it just uses the same song from the PC original, and loops it over and over. What makes music in Army Men 3D so bad is not necessarily, however, what music it uses, but how it uses. Instead of using the whole song for what I assume are disk space reasons, it only uses a 2 to 3 measure clip, and it loops it endlessly for the entire game. It was repetitive in the PC game, but at least you had a solid minute or 2 of track that looped. This is like 5 to 10 seconds that loops over and over again. I got through about a level and a half before I muted my TV and just pulled up Apple Music. Army Men 3D is a competent first entry into the home console space, as a game in that particular series can be expected to have. It's not bad. Excluding the music, it's really not. I'd even go so far as to say it's a fun time if you're into the premise of Army Men. Unfortunately, if you're not into the Army Men series, it's okay. The biggest problem is that the whole thing just feels unpolished. If you're a fan of the series, absolutely play it. If you're a PlayStation enthusiast, give it a try. It is a solid, even if forgettable, title. Overall, though, it doesn't stand out much from the other extremely 1990s games that you can find on the system. My rating for Army Men 3D on the PlayStation is a C.